Thank you all. This is for our village. And so the clever tortoise tricked the mighty elephant. But the real lesson is that wit is greater than strength. I've missed you.
I've missed you too.
This crop's in a bad way. Rains come too late for this field. We'll have to start over.
These greens are so fresh.
They look yummy. Can we get more?
Of course, we have plenty.
This view is absolutely breathtaking. I could stay here forever.
The soil is good this season. Yes, the rains were kind.
The sun was slowly sinking behind the wide African plains, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and gold. In the small village of Kijani, people were returning home after a long day of work. The sound of children laughing echoed between the mud houses, and the smell of cooking fires drifted through the air. It was the kind of peaceful evening that made the village feel warm and alive. But on that very evening, something happened that people in Kijani would whisper about for years to come. At the center of this story is a young man named Jabari. Jabari was known across the village for many things. He was tall, strong, and hardworking. The elders often praised him for his discipline, and many believed he would one day become one of the respected leaders of the community. Young boys admired him, and many families quietly hoped their daughters would one day marry someone like him. But Jabari had one weakness. He was proud. Not the kind of pride that comes from hard work or dignity. No, Jabari carried the kind of pride that made him believe he deserved the very best of everything. The finest land, the strongest cattle, and most of all, the most beautiful wife in the entire region. Many young women in the village admired him, but Jabari never seemed interested. Whenever someone hinted about marriage, he would simply smile and say, "I will marry when the right woman comes." And in his mind, the right woman had to be perfect. But not everyone in the village believed Jabari's heart was as wise as people thought. Among those who watched him closely was an old woman named Mama Naili. Mama Naili was the village storyteller. She had lived longer than most people in Kijani, and many believed she understood things others could not see. Whenever she looked at Jabari, she would shake her head slowly and whisper, "Pride can blind even the strongest eyes." Most people ignored her words. After all, Jabari seemed to have everything. Then one day, someone unexpected arrived in the village. Her name was Zuri. No one knew exactly where she had come from. Some said she was from a distant village across the river. Others believed she had traveled from far beyond the hills where the red earth met the forests. What people did know was that she arrived quietly, carrying only a small woven basket and wearing simple clothes. At first, the villagers didn't pay much attention to her. Zuri was not dressed in bright fabrics like the other young women. She wore no jewelry, no beads, no gold rings. Her hair was tied simply, and she spoke softly to everyone she met. But there was something unusual about her. Something calm. Something mysterious. The children seemed drawn to her kindness. The elders noticed how respectfully she greeted them. Even the animals seemed comfortable around her, following her as she walked through the village paths. Yet despite all this, many people overlooked her, especially Jabari. One afternoon, when the market was full and people were trading grain, fruit, and cloth, Zuri approached Jabari. The moment caught the attention of many villagers, because it was rare for someone to approach him so directly. Jabari was standing beside his cattle, speaking proudly with a group of young men. Zuri stepped closer and greeted him politely. "Good afternoon, Jabari." Her voice was calm, gentle. Jabari looked at her, slightly confused. He had seen her around the village but had never spoken to her before. "Yes," he replied. For a brief moment, Zuri seemed to hesitate. Then she spoke words that surprised everyone nearby. "I have watched the way you care for your land and your people," she said softly. "You are strong and respected. I was wondering if you would consider allowing me to walk beside you in life." The marketplace fell quiet. People slowly turned their heads. Everyone understood what she meant. Zuri was asking Jabari to consider her as a partner, a wife. The young men beside Jabari exchanged shocked glances. No woman had ever approached him so openly before. Jabari stared at her. And then he laughed. Not a gentle laugh. A loud one. "You," he said, shaking his head. "You think you are the woman meant for me?" A few people nearby shifted uncomfortably. But Jabari continued. Look at yourself, he said. You have no wealth, no family here, no beauty that turns heads. Why would a man like me choose someone like you? Zuri did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him quietly. For a moment, something strange passed across her face. Not anger, not sadness, but something deeper. Something that no one in the crowd could fully understand. Then she nodded slowly. I see, she said. Her voice remained calm. As you wish, Jabari. With that, she turned and walked away through the market. The villagers watched her go, whispering among themselves. Some felt embarrassed by Jabari's harsh words. Others shrugged it off, believing he had every right to choose who he wanted. But from across the market, Mama Naili had witnessed everything. The old woman's eyes followed Zuri carefully as she disappeared down the dusty path. And then Mama Naili whispered something that made the person beside her shiver. He has just turned away a gift sent by fate. Days passed. Life in the village continued as usual. Jabari forgot about the encounter quickly, returning to his work and his proud dreams of finding the perfect woman someday. But slowly, strange things began to happen in Kijani. Small things at first. Things people could not explain. And before long, Jabari would begin to realize that the quiet woman he had laughed at in the marketplace was not who he thought she was. By the time he finally understood the truth, it would already be too late. At first, no one connected the strange happenings in Kijani to the quiet woman who had walked away from the marketplace that afternoon. Life in the village moved as it always had. The farmers woke before sunrise, leading their oxen into the fields. Women gathered near the well, sharing stories while drawing water. Children ran along the dusty paths chasing each other between the huts. The village drums still echoed at night, and the stars still stretched wide across the African sky. But slowly small changes began to appear. The first sign came from Jabari's fields. Jabari was proud of his land. His crops were always the strongest in the village. While others struggled with dry soil, his maize stood tall and green. People often said he had the hands of a blessed farmer. But one morning when he walked through his fields, something felt wrong. The leaves of the maize plants were curling strangely. Some had dark spots spreading across them. Jabari frowned and bent down to examine the soil. It was still rich, still moist from the recent rain. There was no clear reason for the plants to weaken. He told himself it was nothing. Perhaps the wind was too strong last night, he muttered. Yet as the days passed, more plants began to wilt. Jabari worked harder than ever, watering the crops, checking the soil, removing damaged leaves. But the problem did not disappear. And that was only the beginning. Not long after, one of his strongest cattle suddenly refused to eat. The animal that once stood proudly beside the others now lay quietly in the shade, breathing slowly and staring into the distance. Jabari called for help from the village elders who understood livestock. They checked the animal carefully, running their hands along its back, examining its eyes and hooves. One of the elders scratched his beard. I cannot see sickness, he said. The animal looks healthy. Another elder nodded in agreement. It is strange, he added. Very strange. Jabari felt a tight knot growing in his chest. But he pushed the worry away. Things like this happen, he told himself. Still, the strange events continued. Tools began to go missing from his storage hut, only to appear later in places he swore he had already searched. His sleep became restless, filled with dreams he could not fully remember. Sometimes he woke up before dawn with a feeling he could not explain, as if someone had been watching him. Meanwhile, the rest of the village began noticing something else. Although many had overlooked her when she first arrived, people slowly began to see her differently. She spent much of her time helping others. If an elderly villager struggled to carry firewood, Zuri quietly stepped forward to help. If children fell while playing, she gently cleaned their wounds and comforted them. One afternoon, a young boy who had been sick for several days suddenly felt better after Zuri sat beside him, speaking softly while placing a cool cloth on his forehead. The boy's mother later whispered to her neighbors, "There is something special about that girl." Some people nodded in agreement. Others remained unsure. "She is kind," one woman said, "but we still know nothing about where she came from." Even so, more villagers began greeting Zuri warmly as she passed. All except one. Jabari avoided her completely. Whenever he saw her walking along the village paths, he looked away and continued his work. Part of him felt embarrassed about what had happened in the marketplace, but another part of him still believed he had done nothing wrong. He had simply spoken the truth. Or at least, that was what he kept telling himself. One evening, as the sky darkened and the village fires flickered to life, Jabari walked toward the well to collect water. The air was cooler now, and the distant sound of night insects filled the silence. As he approached the well, he suddenly stopped. Zuri was standing there. She was drawing water slowly, the rope creaking as the bucket rose from the deep well. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jabari considered turning around and leaving, but something held him in place. Zuri noticed him and gave a small nod of greeting. "Good evening, Jabari." Her voice was calm, just as it had been that day in the market. Jabari shifted slightly, unsure how to respond. "Good evening," he finally said. Another quiet moment passed between them. Then Zuri looked toward the distant fields. "How are your crops?" she asked gently. The question caught Jabari off guard. "They are fine," he said quickly. But Zuri did not respond right away. She simply looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "The land often listens to the heart of the one who cares for it," she said quietly. Jabari frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Zuri lowered the bucket beside the well and wiped her hands. "Sometimes," she continued, "when pride grows too strong, it can cloud the way we see the world around us." Jabari felt a sudden wave of irritation. "Are you trying to lecture me?" he asked. Zuri shook her head calmly. "No," she said. "I'm only sharing something I have learned." Before Jabari could respond, she lifted her basket and began walking away down the dim path. But just before disappearing into the shadows, she paused. Without turning back, she spoke one more sentence. "Some doors close quietly," she said. "But when they do, the path ahead can change in ways we do not expect." Then she continued walking until the darkness swallowed her figure. Jabari stood beside the well, staring after her. Something about her words unsettled him. That night, the wind moved strangely through the village trees. And as Jabari lay awake in his hut, staring into the darkness, he could not shake the feeling that the quiet woman he had rejected somehow knew far more about his life than she should. And deep down, a troubling question began to grow in his mind. Who was Zuri really? The question stayed in Jabari's mind long after that night at the well. For the next few days he tried to ignore it. He threw himself into work, waking before the sun and returning home only when the sky turned dark. But the harder he worked, the more things seemed to fall apart around him. His crops continued to weaken. Entire rows of maize now bent toward the ground, their leaves pale and dry. Farmers from nearby fields began whispering among themselves. "This has never happened to Jabari before," one man said quietly while examining the plants. Another shook his head. "His soil is the best in Kijani. Something is not right." Jabari heard their whispers, but he refused to admit anything was wrong. Pride still held him tightly. "I will fix it," he told them firmly. Yet deep inside, uncertainty had begun to creep in. At the same time, something else was happening in the village. The more people noticed Zuri, the more curious they became about her. She never spoke much about her past, but her presence seemed to bring a strange calm wherever she went. One afternoon, a group of women gathered near the large baobab tree where villagers often met to rest during the heat of the day. Zuri sat quietly beside them, helping weave baskets from long strips of grass. "Your hands are very skilled," one of the women said, watching her work. Zuri smiled softly. "I learned when I was young." "From your mother?" another woman asked. For a moment, Zuri's hands paused. "Yes," she said gently. The women exchanged glances, sensing there was more to the story. But Zuri did not continue and no one wanted to press her too much. Across the village, Mama Naili sat outside her small hut, listening to the distant voices. Her old eyes seemed to notice everything. Later that evening, she slowly made her way to the well, leaning on her wooden staff. A few villagers greeted her respectfully as she passed. When she arrived, she found Zuri there again. The young woman was drawing water just as she had the night Jabari had seen her. Mama Naili watched her for a moment before speaking. "You carry yourself like someone who has walked many roads," the old woman said. Zuri looked up and smiled politely. "Perhaps I have." Mama Naili stepped closer, her sharp eyes studying the young woman's face. "This village is simple," she continued. "But sometimes simple places hide complicated hearts." Zuri did not seem surprised by the comment. "The world is full of complicated hearts," she replied softly. Mama Naili nodded slowly as if confirming something she had already suspected. "Some hearts," the old woman added, "must learn their lessons the hard way." Neither of them mentioned Jabari's name, but the meaning hung quietly in the air between them. Meanwhile, Jabari was facing new problems of his own. One morning, he discovered that another one of his cattle had wandered far from the grazing field during the night. He searched for hours under the hot sun before finally finding the animal standing alone near the edge of the forest. It wasn't injured. It simply stood there, staring into the trees as if something had drawn it there. Jabari led it back to the village, but the strange feeling returned. Nothing seemed normal anymore. Even the villagers began noticing the change in him. The confident young man who once walked proudly through the marketplace now looked tired and distracted. One evening, his close friend Kato approached him. "You have been quiet lately," Kato said as they sat beside the cooking fire. "I am just busy," Jabari replied. Kato looked toward the distant fields. "People are talking," he said carefully. Jabari frowned. "Talking about what?" "About the crops, the cattle, the strange things happening around you." Jabari's jaw tightened. "People always talk," he muttered. Kato hesitated before speaking again. "There are also whispers about Zuri." At the mention of her name, Jabari's expression hardened. "What about her?" Kato lowered his voice. "Some say she is not an ordinary traveler." Jabari scoffed. "She is just a woman who came from another village." "Maybe," Kato said slowly. "But others believe she carries something more." Jabari shook his head, dismissing the idea. But even as he did, the memory of their conversation at the well returned to him. "The land listens to the heart of the one who cares for it." The words echoed quietly in his mind. That same night, the village gathered near the large fire in the center of Kijani. It was a tradition for people to sit together, share food, and listen to stories from the elders. Mama Naili was telling one of her old African folktales about a hunter who ignored a warning from the spirits of the forest. The villagers listened closely as the flames flickered against the dark sky. "Sometimes," Mama Naili said slowly, "a gift may come in a form we do not recognize." Her voice grew softer. "And sometimes, when that gift is rejected, the world has a way of reminding us what we have lost." Jabari sat near the edge of the gathering, staring into the fire. He had the uncomfortable feeling that the story was meant for him. Then something unexpected happened. From across the circle, he noticed Zuri standing quietly among the villagers. The firelight reflected in her calm eyes as she listened to the story. For a brief moment, their eyes met. And Jabari suddenly felt a chill run through him. Because for the first time, he noticed something he had never seen before. Zuri was not looking at him with anger. She was looking at him with something far more unsettling. Understanding. As if she already knew how this story would end, long before he did. After that night by the fire, Jabari could no longer pretend that everything was normal. The village still moved through its daily rhythm, but for him the world felt heavier. Every morning when he walked through his fields, he saw more signs that something was slipping beyond his control. The maize plants that once stood tall were now thin and weak. Some had completely dried, their leaves turning brittle under the sun. Farmers from nearby plots began finishing their harvest early, while Jabari's land looked worse with each passing day. He tried new methods, worked longer hours, and even asked a few elders for advice. They showed him different ways to care for the soil, but nothing seemed to change the slow damage spreading through his crops. At night he slept poorly. Sometimes he woke suddenly, feeling as though he had heard someone speaking just outside his hut. Other nights he dreamed of standing alone in his empty fields, calling out while the wind carried his voice away. The strange feeling grew stronger. And the more it grew, the more his thoughts returned to Zuri. He began noticing how the village had changed its attitude toward her. People greeted her warmly now. Children followed her through the village paths, laughing and asking questions. Even the elders often invited her to sit with them during evening gatherings. One afternoon, Jabari passed by the well and saw a group of women thanking Zuri. An elderly woman held Zuri's hands with gratitude. "You helped my grandson when he was sick," she said. By the next morning, his fever was gone. Zuri only smiled softly. Sometimes people just need care and patience. Jabari stood at a distance, watching quietly. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, the scene made him uneasy. Later that day, he found Mama Naili sitting under the old baobab tree. The village storyteller was carving small patterns into her wooden staff, humming softly to herself. Jabari hesitated before approaching. "Mama Naili," he said. The old woman looked up slowly. "Ah," she replied. The young farmer with many thoughts. Jabari sat down nearby. For a moment he struggled to find the right words. "Do you believe," he asked carefully, "that some people bring change wherever they go?" Mama Naili raised an eyebrow. "Change?" she repeated. "Yes," Jabari said. "Good or bad?" The old woman leaned back against the tree, studying his face. "The world is full of such people," she said. "But the question is not whether they bring change. She tapped her staff gently on the ground. The real question is whether we understand the change when it arrives. Jabari looked down at the dusty ground. And if we misunderstand it? He asked quietly. Mama Nayli's voice softened. Then the lesson often becomes harder. Jabari felt a weight settle in his chest. Before he could say anything else, Mama Nayli spoke again. Tell me something, Jabari, she said. Have you spoken to Zuri since that day in the market? Jabari stiffened. No. And why not? He shrugged, trying to sound confident. There is nothing to say. Mama Nayli watched him carefully. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words, she murmured. That evening, dark clouds began gathering over Kijani. Storms were common during that time of year, but this one felt different. The wind moved through the trees in restless bursts, shaking the branches and sending dust across the village paths. Villagers hurried to secure their animals and bring their belongings inside. Jabari stood near the edge of his field, watching the sky grow darker. Thunder rumbled far in the distance. Normally, rain would have been good news for a farmer. But tonight, something about the storm made him uneasy. Just as the first drops of rain began to fall, he noticed a figure walking calmly along the path beside his field. It was Zuri. She carried her small woven basket, moving slowly despite the rising wind. Jabari felt a sudden impulse he could not ignore. Zuri, he called out. She stopped and turned toward him. For a moment, the two of them stood facing each other as the wind pushed through the tall grass. Zuri walked closer. Yes, Jabari? The storm clouds above them flashed briefly with lightning. Jabari struggled to organize his thoughts. There are strange things happening, he said. Zuri listened quietly. My crops are failing, my cattle behave strangely, even my sleep is disturbed. The wind grew stronger around them. And you think this is connected to me? Zuri asked gently. Jabari hesitated. I don't know, he admitted. But since the day you came to this village, everything has changed. Zuri looked across the field, her expression calm but thoughtful. Change does not always begin where we think it does, she said. Another flash of lightning lit the sky. Jabari stepped closer. Then help me understand, he said, his voice tight with frustration. Who are you really? For the first time, Zuri's expression shifted slightly. Not anger. Not fear. Just a quiet seriousness. I am someone who came when the time was right, she said. The thunder rolled louder now. Jabari felt the rain beginning to fall harder on his shoulders. What does that mean? He demanded. Zuri's eyes met his. Sometimes, she said slowly, life offers us something valuable when we least expect it. The wind rushed through the fields. And sometimes, she continued, the way we respond to that moment shapes everything that follows. Jabari's heart began beating faster. Are you saying my problems are my fault? Zuri did not answer right away. Instead, she glanced toward the dark horizon. The storm is almost here, she said quietly. Then she looked back at him. And storms often reveal truths people have tried to ignore. The rain suddenly began pouring down harder, drenching the dry earth. Jabari felt a deep tension building inside him. Because standing there in the middle of the storm, he realized something that made his stomach tighten with fear. What if Mama Nayli had been right? What if rejecting Zuri had not simply been an insult, but a mistake far greater than he ever imagined? And if that was true, then the storm gathering over Kijani might only be the beginning. The rain fell harder as the storm spread across Kijani. Within minutes, the dusty paths of the village turned into streams of muddy water. The wind pushed against the huts, rattling their wooden doors and shaking the tall trees that surrounded the fields. Jabari stood there in the downpour watching Zuri. Something inside him felt unsettled in a way he had never experienced before. The confident young man who once laughed in the marketplace now felt uncertain, almost small. Zuri adjusted the basket in her hands. You should go back to your home, she said calmly. Storms like this can last all night. But you still haven't answered my question, Jabari said, raising his voice above the wind. Zuri looked at him for a moment. The rain rolled down her face, but she didn't seem bothered by it. Not every answer comes when we demand it, she replied. Before Jabari could say anything else, she turned and continued walking down the path, disappearing slowly into the gray curtain of rain. Jabari watched her go until he could no longer see her. That night the storm did not stop. Thunder echoed across the plains again and again. Lightning flashed so brightly that the entire village lit up for a second at a time. Most villagers stayed inside their homes, hoping the storm would pass by morning. But as the night stretched on, another problem began to unfold. Near the far edge of the village, a section of land suddenly gave way under the heavy rain. Water rushed through a narrow path between the huts, flooding part of the storage area where many farmers kept their grain. By dawn, several sacks of harvested crops had been ruined. The villagers gathered in worried groups, discussing what had happened. "This rain came too suddenly," one farmer said. Another shook his head. "The ground has never collapsed like that before." Jabari arrived late to the gathering. He had barely slept, and his eyes showed the weight of the restless night. As he walked through the muddy village square, he noticed something strange. People were whispering again. But this time they weren't whispering about his crops. They were whispering about Zuri. One of the younger men approached him. "Did you see her last night?" the man asked quietly. "See who?" Jabari replied, though he already knew the answer. "Zuri." Jabari frowned. "I spoke to her before the storm became too strong." The man leaned closer. "Some villagers say they saw her walking near the river while the storm was at its worst." Jabari blinked. "That doesn't mean anything." The man hesitated. "But they said something else." Jabari crossed his arms impatiently. "What?" "They said she wasn't alone." The words hung in the air between them. Jabari felt a strange chill run down his spine. "Who was with her?" he asked. The man shook his head slowly. "No one knows." Across the village square, Mama Naili stood beneath the large baobab tree, watching the conversation from a distance. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp as ever. Later that afternoon, more rumors began spreading. A group of fishermen who had taken shelter near the river during the storm claimed they had seen a faint light moving along the riverbank sometime after midnight. "At first we thought it was lightning," one of them explained to the elders. But the light kept moving, slowly, like someone carrying a lantern. "Did you see who it was?" an elder asked. The fishermen exchanged uncertain looks. "No," one of them admitted. But the shape looked like a woman. Jabari listened to the story from the edge of the crowd, his mind racing. He remembered the path where he had last seen Zuri walking during the storm. That same path led toward the river. That evening, unable to ignore the growing tension in his mind, Jabari made a decision. As the sun began to set and the sky turned deep orange again, he quietly left the village and followed the narrow path toward the riverbank. The ground was still wet from the storm. Birds fluttered between the trees as he passed, and the distant sound of flowing water grew louder with every step. Soon he reached the edge of the river. The place looked peaceful now, as if the storm had never passed through. The water moved slowly between the rocks, reflecting the fading sunlight. Jabari searched the area carefully. At first he saw nothing unusual. But then something caught his eye. Near the base of a large tree beside the river, there were footprints in the damp soil. They were small. A woman's footprints. And beside them, another set. Jabari knelt down, examining them closely. The second set looked different. The shape was unclear, partly washed by the rain, but the steps seemed unusually deep, as if whoever made them carried a heavy weight or moved with great force. Jabari's heart began to beat faster. He followed the trail a short distance along the riverbank. But suddenly, the footprints stopped. Just like that. As if the two figures had simply disappeared. Jabari stood there, staring at the ground in confusion. The river flowed quietly beside him, but the air suddenly felt colder. Then he noticed something else. Carved into the rough bark of the nearby tree was a small symbol. It was simple but unfamiliar. A circle, crossed by 3 curved lines. Jabari ran his fingers over the carving. He had never seen this mark before. But for some reason, the moment he touched it, he felt a strange wave of unease rush through him. Because deep inside, a troubling thought had begun forming in his mind. What if Zuri hadn't just come to Kijani by chance? What if her arrival, the strange events, even the storm itself, were all connected to something much bigger than anyone in the village understood? And if that was true, then the real reason she had asked to walk beside him that day in the marketplace might be far more important than he ever realized. But the most frightening question was only just beginning to surface. If he had rejected her, had he also rejected something the village desperately needed? And if so, what consequences were still waiting to unfold? Jabari stood beside the river for a long time, staring at the strange symbol carved into the tree. The evening light faded slowly, and the sky above the plains began turning deep purple. The river kept flowing quietly, but his thoughts were louder than the water. He looked again at the footprints that had suddenly disappeared. Nothing about it made sense. A cold feeling crept into his chest, the kind that comes when a person realizes they may have misunderstood something important. As darkness settled over the land, Jabari finally turned and walked back toward the village. The path felt longer than usual, and every step carried the weight of the questions filling his mind. When he arrived in Kijani, the village was unusually quiet. Small fires burned outside the huts, and families sat close together, speaking in low voices. The damage from the storm had made everyone uneasy. Jabari spotted Mama Naili sitting beneath the baobab tree again, just as she often did at night. Her wooden staff rested across her lap, and her eyes seemed to be watching the darkness beyond the village. He approached her slowly. "Mama Naili," he said. She did not look surprised to see him. "You went to the river?" she said calmly. Jabari stopped. "How did you know?" The old woman gave a small smile. "Sometimes the path a person chooses is easy to see." Jabari sat down across from her. "I found something there," he said. "A symbol carved into a tree. And footprints that suddenly stopped." Mama Naili nodded slowly. "I thought you might." Jabari leaned forward. "Do you know what it means?" For a moment, Mama Naili remained silent. The fire beside them crackled softly, sending sparks into the night air. Then she spoke. "Many years ago," she began, "my grandmother told me a story. An old African folktale that few people remember now." Jabari listened carefully. She said that sometimes when a village stands at an important turning point, a traveler may arrive. Not just any traveler, but someone sent to test the hearts of the people. Jabari felt his chest tighten. "A test?" he asked. Mama Naili looked directly at him. "Yes. A test of humility, kindness, and wisdom." The words echoed heavily in his mind. "Zuri," he whispered. Mama Naili nodded once. "Some visitors come quietly," she said. "They do not wear crowns or carry power that people can easily see. Instead they watch. They listen. They learn how people treat others when they believe no one important is watching." Jabari's stomach twisted with regret. "And the symbol?" he asked. "It is very old," Mama Naili replied. "Older than this village. It marks a place where the unseen world sometimes touches our own." Jabari stared at the ground. "If what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "then my rejection in the marketplace." Mama Naili finished the thought gently. "Was part of the test." The fire popped loudly beside them. For the first time, Jabari felt the full weight of his actions. His proud words in the marketplace replayed in his mind again and again. He had laughed. He had judged her by what he saw on the outside. He had turned her away without ever asking who she truly was. "Is that why everything is going wrong?" he asked quietly. "My fields, the cattle, the storm?" Mama Naili shook her head slowly. "Not as punishment," she said, "but as consequence." Jabari looked confused. "Sometimes when a door closes," she explained, "the protection that came with it closes too." The words hit him harder than the storm had. "What do I do now?" he asked. Mama Naili sighed softly. "By the time a lesson becomes clear, the moment that created it is often already gone." Just then, footsteps approached across the village square. Jabari looked up. It was Zuri. She walked calmly toward them, her woven basket resting against her side just as it had the day she first arrived. The entire village seemed to notice her presence. Conversation slowly faded as people turned to watch. Zuri stopped a few steps away from the fire. Her eyes moved gently across the gathered villagers before finally settling on Jabari. For a moment no one spoke. Then Jabari stood up. The confident pride he once carried was gone. In its place was something far more honest. "I was wrong," he said quietly. The words were simple but they carried through the silent square. "I judged you without understanding who you were. I spoke with pride instead of respect." Zuri listened without interrupting. Jabari continued. "If I could return to that moment in the marketplace, I would answer differently." A soft wind moved through the village. For a long moment, Zuri said nothing. Then she stepped forward. "You have learned something important," she said gently. Jabari's heart pounded. "Then it's not too late?" he asked. Zuri studied him carefully. "Some lessons change a person," she said. "And that change can still bring good to the world." Hope flickered briefly in Jabari's chest. But then Zuri added quietly, "However, the moment you rejected was not only meant for you." The villagers looked at one another in confusion. "What do you mean?" Jabari asked. Zuri turned her gaze toward the fields surrounding the village. "I came to see whether the people of Kijani were ready for something greater," she explained. "A season of prosperity, stronger harvests, protection from the long drought that is coming." The words sent murmurs through the crowd. "But those gifts," she continued softly, "were meant to grow from a partnership built on humility." Jabari felt the ground shift beneath him. "You're saying, The village lost that chance because of me? Zuri shook her head gently. No. A single moment does not belong to one person alone. It belongs to everyone who witnesses it. She looked around at the villagers. Some saw pride, but said nothing. Some felt discomfort, but stayed silent. The village square grew painfully quiet. Zuri then looked back at Jabari. But you were the one standing in the center of that moment. Jabari lowered his head. The weight of his regret felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. After a long pause, Zuri turned toward the path leading out of the village. It is time for me to continue my journey, she said. The villagers gasped softly. Jabari stepped forward quickly. Wait, he said. Is there truly nothing that can change what has happened? Zuri paused. Then she gave him one final look. Every ending creates another beginning, she said. With that, she began walking toward the darkness beyond the village. Jabari watched her go, the realization settling deep inside him. He had rejected a gift he did not understand. But as Zuri disappeared into the night, Mama Naili quietly whispered something that made his heart race again. Look closely at the fields tomorrow morning. Jabari frowned. Why? Mama Naili's eyes reflected the firelight as she smiled faintly. Because sometimes, she said softly, even when a gift is refused, a small piece of its blessing may still remain. The next morning, the village of Kijani woke to a quiet calm that felt almost unnatural after the chaos of the storm. The sun rose slowly, painting the plains in soft shades of gold and green. Birds chirped from the treetops, and the air smelled fresh with rain. Jabari stepped outside his hut, unsure what to expect, but determined to face the day with open eyes. He walked toward his fields, the soil still damp and dark from the storm. At first he feared the worst. But as he approached the center of the land, he noticed something unusual. Among the wilted maize and broken stalks, a small patch of green had survived. Not only survived, it seemed stronger than before, reaching upward with resilience that almost glowed in the morning light. Jabari's heart skipped. He knelt down, touching the soil, feeling its life beneath his fingers. It was as if the storm had cleared away weakness, leaving a chance for something new to grow. The crops around the patch seemed healthier too, slowly beginning to recover. A quiet sense of hope spread through him. He understood in that instant what Zuri had meant. Even when a gift is refused, a small piece of its blessing may remain. He spent the morning carefully tending the land, working alongside neighbors who had come to inspect their own fields. Whispers of surprise and relief spread quickly through the village. People noticed the recovery, the subtle growth, and they began talking not about loss but about resilience. It was as if the storm had brought more than destruction. It had brought a chance to see the strength and character of Kijani itself. Later, Jabari went to the village square, where Mama Naili waited beneath the baobab tree. Her eyes twinkled as he approached, and for a moment he felt the weight of all the lessons he had learned through the storm, the crops, and his encounter with Zuri. I understand now, he said quietly. It wasn't just about me. It was about how I see others, and how I lead by my choices. Mama Naili nodded. Yes, pride can blind, but reflection and action can heal. Jabari smiled, a sense of clarity warming him. He had learned humility, and with it came the understanding that he had a responsibility to the people of Kijani, not just to his own pride or desires. Over the following days, the village slowly returned to normal. The people shared their harvests, repaired their homes, and helped one another rebuild. But there was a new sense of awareness in Kijani. Conversations carried a gentler tone, people greeted each other with more care, and children played with the laughter of freedom that comes after fear has passed. Jabari found himself thinking of Zuri often. Not with regret but with gratitude. She had shown him a truth he could not have seen alone. He wondered where her journey would take her next, and he hoped that wherever she went, she would continue spreading the quiet wisdom she had brought to Kijani. One afternoon as he worked in his field, he noticed something strange. A small basket had been left at the edge of his property. Inside, neatly arranged, were seeds, strong, dark, and promising. There was a note tied to the handle with simple words, "For those ready to grow." Jabari smiled, understanding immediately. Zuri's blessing had not left entirely. She had given them another chance, not because he asked but because she knew the village could use it. He carefully planted the seeds, feeling a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. The work was not easy and the land still needed care and attention. But now he was not working alone. The villagers joined him, helping with the planting, laughing and sharing stories, learning that prosperity grows not from pride, but from cooperation and respect. Over time the crops flourished. The maize grew taller and stronger than before, the cattle were healthy, and Kijani thrived. Jabari became a leader not through arrogance, but through example. People trusted him because he had learned to listen, to reflect, and to act with humility. And sometimes, in the quiet evenings when the sun dipped behind the hills, Jabari thought he could see a shadow moving along the distant path, a hint of a calm presence. A reminder of Zuri, the mysterious woman who had challenged him, who had tested the heart of the village, and who had given Kijani a chance to rise stronger than ever. The village had survived the storm, but more importantly, it had survived the test of character. People learned that life often offers lessons in unexpected ways, that pride can blind even the strongest hearts, and that humility, courage, and kindness can open doors to blessings that might otherwise remain hidden. As Jabari looked across his thriving fields, the wind brushing through the green leaves, he felt a deep sense of peace. The storm had passed, the crops had grown, and the village had learned to embrace both challenges and gifts. He understood that life was not only about the moments we accept, but also about the ones we initially reject. Because sometimes, those are the moments that teach us the most. And though Zuri was gone, her presence lingered, not in the form of a person but in the lessons she left behind. In the fields, in the rivers, in the hearts of the villagers, her wisdom had taken root. Jabari whispered to the wind, "Thank you," and in the quiet that followed, he felt a sense of hope that would last far beyond the storms, far beyond the challenges, and far beyond the pride he once carried. Kijani had been tested, and it had grown. And somewhere far away, under another sky, a quiet traveler continued her journey, leaving seeds of wisdom in every place she walked. The story of pride, regret, and unexpected blessings would be told for generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the people, and the lessons we least expect. And so, the village thrived, the fields grew, and Jabari walked among his people, stronger not because he had everything, but because he had learned to see what truly mattered. The storm had passed. The lessons had been learned. And Kijani would never forget the quiet woman who changed everything.